Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. In this overview, we're going to be looking at the most popular civilization for players below 1000 elo, as well as the most popular Arabia pick averaging across all skill levels. That is, of course, the Franks. Now, Franks sometimes get a bit of a stigma for being the try-hard civilization, simply because for several years they had by far the best performance on the ladder for intermediate and casual players. While they've had some small nerfs and aren't quite as dominant now as they were, they remain quite possibly the best choice for players looking to try online for the first time. We'll talk about their typical strategies as well as look at their other, sometimes underappreciated options. Let's check them out. Starting off with their team bonus, Franks and their allies Knights have +2 line of sight. Knights actually have pretty low vision by default, and this roughly doubles how many tiles they can see at once. This is really the Franks' core unit in the mid to late game, and whether you're raiding or just trying to keep tabs on enemy units around the map, that extra sight can be quite handy. Further supporting that Knight focus, their first civ bonus is their Cavalry have 20% more hit points, starting in Feudal. While that means Frank scouts are the same strength as everyone else's in Dark Age, they immediately jump in Feudal from 45 to 54 HP. That lets them take 2 extra hits from enemy scouts, lets them beat a men-at-arms one-on-one, which generic scouts actually lose against, and take 4 extra arrows from archers, though notably they're still taken down by spearmen in the regular 3 attacks. Franks miss out on bloodlines, so other civilization scouts can technically be stronger, though that's a pretty big investment in Feudal, and Franks are always getting about half that effect instantly for free. Then, after upgrading Knights to Cavalier or Paladin, the extra 20% then actually ends up being even better than Bloodlines, giving Paladins, for example, 32 more HP compared to Bloodlines' 20. This gives Franks extremely well-rounded Cavalier or Paladins, taking more hits from ranged units, 1 extra attack from Halberdiers, and are strong enough to beat most other Paladin civs head-to-head, with Teutons and Lithuanians being notable exceptions. The one drawback of this bonus, and lacking Bloodlines in general though, is it means Frank light cavalry is actually fairly weak in the late game. The fact it's just a percentage multiplier means it only adds 12 HP instead of Bloodlines' 20. So in the late game, Franks actually aren't that great of a cavalry civ, as much as they're a great knight civ specifically. Their next bonus is their first economic one, which is their foragers work 15% faster. While forage bushes are usually the slowest source of food collection in Dark Age, this bonus makes it a slightly faster source for Franks than sheep. Assuming you're using the most standard 4 on berries after the first boar is lured, with a 22 pop uptime, this bonus should put you about 30 food ahead, giving you another 20 on the way to Feudal, putting you about 50 food ahead when hitting Feudal Age. Your berries are then eventually finished a little over a minute faster, 80 food then ahead of a generic civilization. Those numbers aren't huge, and this was recently brought down from 25% to 15%, but is enough to make a scout opening feel a little more smooth. Combining with and actually complementing this bonus is then that Franks also get free farming tags, meaning horse collar, etc. Again, this ties in perfectly with scouts, as a very food-intensive strategy, and doesn't just save you the direct 75 food and wood cost of horse collar right away, but ensures your first round of farms last about 4 minutes longer. If you're putting a lot of farms down starting around 10 or 11 minutes, that means instead of having those reseed at about 20 minutes, as you might be on the way to Castle Age and saving up wood for town centers, Frank's free horse collar delays those reseedings until 24 minutes, after most players have their extra town centers down and are better able to accommodate farms. Arguably even more impactful is getting Heavy Plow for free in Castle Age, which not only gives a proportionally greater boost to your farm's capacity and delaying future reseeding for another 6.5 minutes, but also gives +1 carry capacity to farmers, which all on its own I found previously boosts farmer collection speed by about 5%. Between skipping bloodlines and free farm upgrades, the moment you hit Castle Age, Franks have already saved 650 resources in tax, and you can see how being able to instantly pump out 120 HP knights from 2 or 3 stables can feel very oppressive, with most other civilizations a step behind. What's even better though is all of this is happening passively, which makes Franks particularly friendly for beginners. Somewhat breaking with this very cavalry streamlined focus, the Franks' last bonus is their castles are discounted 15%, growing to 25% in Imperial. That starts by saving 97 stone per castle, or 162 if you wait a bit longer. A standard map like Arabia has 12 stone piles for each player, which is usually enough for about 6 castles and 3 town centers. Franks, on the other hand, can easily accommodate 1 or potentially even 2 more castles. This also sets you up nicely to be a little faster at building the first one in particular, whether that be defensively or on your opponent's doorstep. So that's the Franks' pretty straightforward bonuses, which set you up nicely for most opening strategies. While cavalry is particularly encouraged here, archers and crossbows can also be a smart play to set up a later switch to knights, pushing your opponent into things like skirmishers. Now though, let's take a closer look at those cheaper castles and what unique unit and text they provide. Starting with their unique unit, the Franks have the Throwing Axeman, which at first may seem strange, as they're a cavalry civ with an infantry unique unit. But it's less strange when you consider it in the context of Franks overall. One of the major issues they have is that being a predictable civ with the knight line, you can run into a lot of counter units, notably spears and camels, especially in Imperial Age. The Throwing Axeman gives you a very solid range support unit against both of those common knight counters. At a glance, they're quite a bit tankier than, say, a crossbow or hand cannoneer in Imperial, and while they're a little shorter range, they bring the very unique quality of dealing melee damage, combined with a pretty cheap individual cost at 55 food and 25 gold each. That unusual melee attack lets them thrive in a lot of roles that ranged units typically struggle in, for example, dealing a lot more damage against siege, buildings, and some anti-archer specialists, like the skirmisher, eagle warrior, etc., which have high pierce armor, but little to no melee armor. I recently looked at this unit in a fair amount of depth, but to hit on some of the key takeaways, they do have some upfront costs, notably an elite upgrade, a unique tech, and all the regular infantry upgrades you'd expect. While they're still relatively short range, they have 100% accuracy and a pretty fast attack rate, which turns out in Imperial Age to be enough for them to roughly match the hand cannoneer's damage output against halberdiers, despite the Throwing Axeman not having any extra bonus here. You might not expect it looking at their attack alone, but I found swapping out paladins for an equivalent value of Throwing Axeman not only leads to a more cost-efficient fight than Frank paladins alone, but even an equal or slightly better outcome to using a similar swap with hand cannoneers. The Throwing Axeman definitely has some extra upgrade costs, especially the elite upgrade, but in the long run it's a cheap and effective support unit that gives a lot of tankiness, which Frank's other range units don't have, doing much better for example against infantry up close than the hand cannoneer. Just as important but easy to overlook is they're also a solid choice against camels as well, dealing damage faster than Frank's other ranged support units, to the point again where swapping out a few Frank paladins for Throwing Axeman leads to better engagements against camels. Given Franks have a particularly weak archery range, missing a lot of upgrades, the Throwing Axeman fills an important role of keeping opponents honest and not just spamming straight counter units for paladins. Remember, you have cheaper castles as well, and the Throwing Axeman trains about 60% faster than crossbows, so the castle requirement isn't as big of a deal as it seems at first. It may not be the most common unit, and other options like scorpions or halberdiers can also fill the same roles against enemy spears and camels. But it's worth keeping the Throwing Axeman in mind as it handles both for a pretty cheap unit cost, also bringing the unique melee damage aspect against things like eagles and buildings. Moving on now to their unique techs, the first is Bearded Axe, increasing Throwing Axeman range by 1. It's not super expensive at 300 food and gold, and helps partly address the Throwing Axeman's pretty short range. It's worth getting if you're making Axemen, though by the same token, it's also part of why they're a bit of an expensive unit to get started. Their other unique tech is Chivalry, which increases the work rate of Frank stables by 40% at the cost of 600 wood and 500 gold. At first, that doesn't really seem worth it unless you have 16 or more stables, and from one perspective, you'd often be getting more total production by building more stables with those resources than getting this tech, though I think that misses a bit of the bigger picture. The argument in favor of Chivalry is first it speeds up any research you're doing at the stable, and picking up Chivalry while getting Cavalier for example means the Paladin upgrade will come in significantly sooner. There's also a difficult to quantify benefit of turning your resources into units faster, with that delay training every Paladin shortened by a few seconds. Of course, conscription is still better for having almost the same effect on many more buildings for a significantly cheaper cost, but in a team game situation where you often settle into the role of spamming a lot of paladins, this is worth picking up, and even in 1v1s, you're probably going to be making enough cavalry most games as Franks to justify it. So that's their unique unit in techs, which while giving you an infantry unit, deep down is still all about helping your cavalry focus. Now let's take a look at the full context of what they have to work with in their tech tree, starting with the archers. As mentioned earlier, they're actually missing a ton of upgrades here, including Arbalester, Thumbring, and both Imperial Blacksmith techs. For Hand Cannoneer, that's not a huge deal, as only armor on that list impacts them, but it makes the crossbow and Cavalry Archer far below average, with even pretty weak skirmishers in Imperial Age as well. An Archer opening leading into crossbows is completely fine, but after early Castle Age falls off pretty hard. I'd say it's a C- for the archery range, kept afloat mostly by the Hand Cannoneer. Next up, for infantry, it's actually surprisingly good. Franks have fully upgraded champions and halberdiers, though without any particular bonuses. Throwing Axemen are also technically infantry, and can play a bit of that anti-trash and anti-building role that infantry usually picks up. So I'd say it's a solid B+ if we include the Axemen. Moving on to cavalry, obviously you get out to a fantastic scout rush with your faster berries, extra HP, and free farm upgrades, all pitching in to give you one of the best early Castle Age knight spams in the game. They then have indisputably a top 3 paladin with faster producing stables and more line of sight on top of the highest HP. While the title of best paladin is maybe more debatable these days, Franks are definitely in that conversation. On the other hand, lacking bloodlines and hussars gives them a way below average light cavalry line on top of no extra regional options. They're very good at one thing, and as long as they have the gold and economy set up to do it, they're in a great position, while simultaneously lacking some of the flexibility of other top-tier cavalry civs. I'd say it's an A for cavalry. Next up, for siege, personally I'm always surprised how good Frank Siege is. They have siege engineers and even bombard cannons, which is a combo only 12 other civs have. There's a natural flow of counter units that all starts from the Franks Knightline and ends with enemy onagers, so having bombard cannons to close that loop can be incredibly useful. Keep scorpions in mind as well, as one of many different ways you can handle enemy halberdiers. I'd say it's a B+ for siege. Moving on to the navy, early on there's no real wood or naval bonus, and generally berries are less of a priority as well, so I'd say it's a pretty underwhelming C early on, though you aren't missing any options. Late game though, Franks are lacking Bracer and Shipwright, so while theoretically you save some wood in the long run with guaranteed farm upgrades, statistically Franks are the 4th worst performing civ on island maps over the last year and a half, which isn't that shocking to me, as their bonuses emphasize the wrong things on water. I'd say it's another C late for a C overall. Taking a quick look at the monks, right away you're missing Redemption and Atonement, so a good monk rush is kind of off the table. Outside of that though, as a support unit for collecting relics, conversions, and healing your expensive cavalry units, they still have different ways to contribute. The new devotion tech is a pretty obvious pickup for your knights, with faith being an option as well. I'd say it's a B, with the monastery having a role to play one way or another, even if it's not the Franks' main focus. Next up, for defenses, at their core, Franks are more of an aggression-focused civilization, ideally using knights and castle drops to keep pressure on the opponent, rather than just walling and booming. That said, cheaper castles are great defensively, and offset having pretty weak towers in general, as well as lacking Bracer. I'd also throw in the Axeman here as a potential defensive asset, given its extra ability to threaten siege or trash units that are pushing your base. Overall, in fact, despite their potential for aggression, I'd give Franks a B+ for defenses. And finally, for trash units, I have to say it's not great, with underpowered skirmishers, generic halberdiers, and light cavalry basically getting half the effect of bloodlines. Gold is pretty important for Franks, even if it's just to sustain throwing Axemen or champions, and when it runs dry, they're in a lot of trouble. I'd say it's a pretty unimpressive C for trash. So to wrap up with some final thoughts, despite a few holes in the tech tree, it's worth reiterating Franks are an A or borderline S tier civilization for the majority of players, as they're just so good at what they do. With everything so streamlined and their bonuses automatic and passive, they're perfect for someone who wants to hit the ground running with a strong civilization online. Normally for these overviews, I don't give specific build order advice, but Franks are kind of special. If you're below 1000 ELO or haven't played online before, learning a 22 pop scout build order with Franks to start is a perfect approach if you're trying to beat a parent, coworker, or moderate difficulty AI for the first time and looking for the path of least resistance. In addition to always being a competitive 1v1 civ, Franks are also an amazing civ in team games, given their potential to either scout rush, which works as a flank or pocket on open maps, or execute a straight fast castle build into knights, which can be effective up to a certain level of opponent or the moderate AI. I should note, as you go up the ladder, straight fast castles on open map team games are more questionable and may result in your flank getting teamed up on. As we've seen, gold is very important to the Franks' late game compositions, but if it's there, you have endlessly spammable paladins, good siege, and a couple of potential support units in the throwing Axeman and hand cannoneer. They're the perfect civ if you're trying to get your feet under you and are just starting out, which reminds me a lot of the adorable animals just learning to walk in my new business side venture, Spirit of the Lamb, a petting zoo for all baby animals, as long as they're lambs. It even has a great website thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Where websites traditionally take a lot of technical knowledge to set up and maintain, Squarespace is a tool to help you create a professional-looking site within minutes. If you're a blogger, own a small business, or chasing the passive income dream of opening an online store, but have no idea how to make a functional website from scratch, Squarespace has you covered with templates and tools to help you out, simplifying the website building process. Squarespace even has great third-party extensions to handle things like inventory, taxes, shipping, and scheduling to accommodate your specific needs. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/spiritofthelaw to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that's a general overview of the Franks and a long-needed update considering how far the Civ has come since the first time I covered them. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.